Fox News alert: tensions between Israel and the Obama administration going public. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu accusing President Obama and his administration of a diplomatic ambush. He blames the United States for helping to draft a UN resolution condemning Israel for settlements in the West Bank. The U.S. officially abstained from that UN vote instead of vetoing it as it has for many years. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, President-elect Donald Trump announcing plans to shut down his charitable foundation to avoid conflicts of interest. Critics say the move will not go far enough. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Patty Ann Brown.
And good to be with you this morning, Patty Ann. And hello, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. Bill and Martha are off today. Well, Mr. Trump announced on Christmas Eve that he plans to shut down his foundation. Democrats, though, say in addition to that, he also has to put his business empire in a real blind trust. That's something, as you know, he has so far refused to do. This is New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman also raising concerns, saying that foundation is still under investigation.
Well, Peter Doocy is live in Palm Beach, Florida, where Mr. Trump is spending the holidays with his family. Peter, is the president-elect saying he's actually done with all charity until after his presidency?
No, Patty Ann, but what the president-elect is saying is that he's going to start pursuing philanthropy in other ways. So over the weekend, he put out a long statement about why he is going to shut down that charitable foundation. And he says this in part: the foundation has done enormous good works over the years in contributing millions of dollars to countless worthy groups, including supporting veterans, law enforcement officers, and children. However, to avoid even the appearance of any conflict with my role as president, I have decided to continue to pursue my strong interest in philanthropy in other ways. Democrats, though, say they have a problem with the timing of this announcement, with a DNC spokesman saying this: there is something richly symbolic about Donald Trump choosing Christmas Eve to shutter the one part of his financial empire that could, in theory, have a positive impact on people's lives if it were being used in the right way. So that goes to show that the same people who have been calling for Mr. Trump to get out of his businesses and out of his charitable enterprises are still complaining, even when he announces that he's doing just that. Patty Ann.
And meanwhile, he might not even be legally allowed to shutter the foundation right away. There's a legal issue there.
Right, and the legal issue is with the charity's registration in the state of New York. There is an investigation by the Attorney General, and a spokesman for New York's Attorney General says this in part on Twitter: foundation still under investigation by AG Schneiderman, cannot legally dissolve until investigation complete. This is the second Trump charity to shut down in just the last few days. Remember, at the end of last week, Eric Trump, one of the president-elect's sons, announced that he was going to stop raising money for his foundation because he realizes now that some donors could just be giving money to different causes with hopes of getting access to his dad, the next president, who we understand is expected to have a quiet day at Mar-a-Lago down here in the Palm Beach area. Patty Ann.
All right, Peter Doocy reporting live from Florida. Thank you.
And for more on what will happen to the foundation and to Mr. Trump's business empire, Daniel Harper joins us. He's a Washington bureau chief for the New York Post and also the author of the book Clinton, Inc. Daniel, always good to see you. The foundation, though, it's small potatoes compared to the Trump business entity. So is closing it down enough, do you think, to satisfy critics?
Sure. In this one aspect, I think it's going to satisfy critics. I don't think anybody's going to say that you're not doing enough for the foundation or you're allowing the foundation to be used if no foundation exists. I think what's interesting here is he has set a standard by closing this foundation. He says he's doing so to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. That means you can assume that that standard will be applied to his business practices and to other avenues that he hasn't yet publicly dealt with. And I think that's what we learned here, is that he is going to hold himself, we assume, based on this statement, to this standard where he wants to avoid the appearance of conflict of interest. And that raises a lot of questions about how his business enterprise will be shuttered or put into blind trust, or we don't know exactly. He's supposed to announce in a few weeks' time.
So what do you think will happen?
Well, he has signaled that some of his kids will run it. We don't think that there's going to be a fire sale or any sort of sale of the entire company. Keep in mind, the company is himself, right? A lot of what's weird about the Trump business enterprise is that he licenses his own name to a lot of buildings. He doesn't necessarily own the building, so the value of it is sort of based on his association as a luxury brand. So it's not clear how he's going to do it. I think, it's a very important decision. I think the Democrats are obviously chomping on the bit. They're gonna hold him to this throughout his presidency, and they're going to raise these questions going forward in the same way that Donald Trump raised these questions about Hillary Clinton. So how he deals with this in many ways defines the opposition to his presidency for the years to come, which is why it's so important that he gets it right. He hasn't really tipped his hand more than to say of course he's going to handle it. It's not that complicated, and his kids will run some of the business, or some of his kids, but we don't know beyond that. But it is obviously hugely important.
Yeah, well, some of the critics say that the kids running it is not enough. He's got to put it in a blind trust. His defense is everyone knows he's a zillionaire or billionaire, whatever, all these years, and that you just can't dispose of real estate. I mean, can you put it in, the deeds in a blind trust in that way? What do you think he should do?
I think for other businesses, or if he were just wealthy and he owned a lot of stock in a lot of different companies, he could put it in a blind trust. It's a little more complicated when he himself is the brand, right? So, I mean, you could put the Trump company into a blind trust and he doesn't necessarily know the day-to-day operations, but he can still identify a Trump hotel because his name's on it, right? So he can still identify these things. So it's complicated because of his business in particular. We've never, in his defense, obviously, we've never had somebody this rich, have this big of a business, become president of the United States. So this is really, it's uncharted. We don't know where he's going to go. We don't really know what's appropriate or what he should be doing, but it's going to be an issue the whole time. People are going to say, did you make this decision to benefit your company? And I think it's obviously a place where he's going to be criticized for years to come. So how he handles it is just, you can't emphasize enough how important of a decision that he's making right now behind closed doors.
And he really has to finesse it and deal with it. And Daniel, you're the author of a book, Clinton Inc., which several years ago dealt with the Clinton Foundation and with the Clintons' way of doing business. You remember going back to the campaign, Mr. Trump called the Clinton Foundation, quote, the most corrupt, enterprise in political history. I mean, was that really fair in hindsight? And how do you think the critics will judge the Clinton Foundation versus the Trump Foundation? And what do you think is going to happen to the Clinton Foundation?
Well, I think the Clinton Foundation is going to operate in a way more so than if Hillary had won, because now that's sort of all they have. So to answer that question, I don't think it was quite fair to call it the most corrupt enterprise, but anytime you have a business or any sort of venue or vessel that can accept money and funds from outside sources, and you're a politician, you have to wonder why that money's coming in. Is it to influence these decisions? And for the Clintons, they were also living off the largesse of the foundation. I think that criticism that Donald Trump levied at Hillary Clinton, I think in a large part was correct. And now he has to worry about it being brought back to him, right? Now he has to worry about other people making the same accusations. He could operate beforehand with impunity because he was an elected official. That all changes January 20th when he's sworn in right behind me at the Capitol.
Yeah, I guess maybe sometimes be careful what you wish for, at least when it comes to dealing with your business and those type of accusations. Daniel Halper, author of Clinton Inc. and the Washington bureau chief for the New York Post, founded by Alexander Hamilton in 1801.
That's right.
Daniel, thank you for joining us. Good to see you. Happy holidays.
Happy Boxing Day.
But yes, exactly. Of course. Thank you.
Well, Israel is lashing out at the Obama administration. Israel claiming to have ironclad proof that the White House itself helped to create that United Nations resolution condemning Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The accusations come after the U.S. abstained from voting, a move Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called a shameful ambush. Kevin Corke is traveling with the president. He joins us now live from Honolulu. Hi, Kevin. What is the administration saying about this controversy?
Well, I got to tell you, Petty Ann Brown, they are upset. They are bristling at this suggestion that somehow the U.S. has orchestrated this vote in the UN and pushed the resolution along. In fact, if you listen to Principal Deputy White House Press Secretary Eric Schultz, he is not mincing words. Let me share just a portion of what he told us here at Fox News yesterday in a statement. He said, and I'm quoting now, the U.S. did not draft this resolution, nor did the U.S. introduce this resolution. The Egyptians, in partnership with the Palestinians, are the ones who began circulating an earlier draft of the resolution. Can you feel the passion in the words there? He goes on to say the Egyptians are the ones who moved it forward on Friday, and we took the position that we did when it was put to a vote. But Israeli leaders, as you point out, continue to publicly accuse the administration of having orchestrated that resolution that condemns Israel's settlement construction.
Well, we have rather ironclad information from sources in both the Arab world and internationally that this was a deliberate push by the United States, and in fact they helped create the resolution in the first place. And so it's deeply disappointing that this has been the path of President Obama.
Did you hear that? I mean, he just said ironclad proof. I mean, wow. And the continued frustration for some of the administration is the idea that Bibi Netanyahu, Petty Ann, has been effusive in his praise for the administration for its security support for Israel. But obviously that is not the storyline right now. And I don't think the story is going away anytime soon. Petty
Yeah,
Ann?
for sure. And given the unprecedented nature of the abstention at the UN, is the Obama administration expressing any concern about damage long-term to U.S.-Israeli relations?
Yeah, they would say flat out not at all. They'd say, look, Kevin, given the strategic support and the important relationship between the two countries, it's not going to be upset by this little latest bump in the road. But I have to tell you, critics, Petty Ann, aren't so sure.
To get even in the lame duck period when there are no checks and balances and you don't have to worry about any election. It's the most undemocratic thing a president can do, to tie the hands of his successor during the lame duck period. And what he did was so nasty, he pulled a bait and switch.
And while the U.S.-Israeli relations may get a bit of a reset under the Trump administration, the same may be said for the United Nations, with the president-elect tweeting recently, asked the UN things will be different after January 20th. Now, what that means and how that'll all play out, we'll all have to wait and see. But clearly, things are a-changing, my friend. Back to you.
Yeah, I would love to hear what the ironclad proof is that Israel has. This is a very interesting story. Kevin Corke, live in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, what is the next move for Israel and the incoming Trump administration? The showdown over the settlements and the Security Council vote. We'll have that coming up.
Also, Press Secretary Josh Earnest calls the Obama White House the most transparent in history and says the media doesn't give him enough credit for it. We'll have a fair and balanced debate on that coming up.
All right, Fox's alert for you about the manhunt that's now underway in Tennessee. 4 inmates escaped from a county jail early on Christmas Day. The 4 were among a group of 6 men that got out through a hole behind a toilet. This happened in Dandridge, Tennessee. That's near Knoxville. The county sheriff there says a leak apparently rusted the bolts holding the unit, and the men were able to pry that thing right off the wall. Authorities say that one of the men, David Rain Fraser, is considered to be dangerous.
Given the fact that President Obama has been the most transparent president in American history, and given the fact that he has not gotten much, if any, credit for that from journalists, what incentive does a guy like Donald Trump, who I think has a predisposition against transparency when you consider the way that he handled his tax returns, what incentive, what argument does anybody have that there is a benefit for him to be more transparent?
White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest explaining what he calls one of the beefs he has with journalists, saying the media doesn't give President Obama enough credit for running what he calls the most transparent White House in U.S. history. Ron Mayer is a Republican strategist and the editor of Red Alert Politics. Brad Bauman is a Democratic strategist and a partner at Pastorum Group and a former executive director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest telling CNN's Brian Stelter that President Obama has been the most transparent president in American history. Immediately, Twitter comments mocking that claim, one saying, if a Democrat repeats an obvious lie often enough, the MSN will dutifully report it as fact. Ron?
So I think it's pretty funny. Not only did Josh Earnest say it's the most transparent administration ever, he also then, right after that, said that no one really cares about transparency and there's no constituency in American politics that cares. This would be like if Jay Cutler, the quarterback for the Bears, said no one cares about quarterbacking, but I'm the best quarterback of all time. No, you're not the best, and yes, people do care. Where have you been in 2016? A lot of this election with Hillary Clinton was about transparency. The fact that she avoided the FOIA laws by going on a private server, the fact that she obfuscated public information, classified documents, and so this year was about transparency. People do care, and no, President Obama hasn't been the most transparent. Just ask the Washington Post, who called this one of the most secret administrations of all time, who said that they took punitive actions against journalists, including, by the way, this network's James Rosen and the New York Times reporters as well. And so this is pretty universally mocked, not just by Republicans and conservatives, but also by mainstream liberal-leaning outlets.
You know, Josh Earnest made the same comment back in August. You may recall he was responding to a column, speaking of Hillary Clinton, that said that if Hillary were elected, quote, her administration would continue the tradition of being still more secretive than the one before it. The Obama White House has achieved just that with its abysmal record on fulfilling Freedom of Information Act requests and its record of prosecuting whistleblowers who have shared national security information with the press. Brad, journalists have been complaining about a lack of transparency in this White House for a while.
You know, there are a couple of things that I will say to this. Number one, this has been the most transparent administration in the history of our republic. They have released thousands and thousands of data sets that the U.S. government had otherwise just sitting on shelves so that the American people could look at it, understand exactly what data is being collected by the United States, and also look at places where there may need to be some efficiencies built in. But we do need to make some sort of accounting for the fact that some things are national security and that those cannot be released. One of the biggest problems, and you know, everybody on the conservative side has said this over and over again. Oh yeah, you know, the big problem with Hillary Clinton using a private server is that national security documents could be hacked. Well, guess what? Sometimes FOIA requests need to be scrubbed very, very carefully to make sure that there's nothing of sensitive value. Now, you know that that's the truth. Further,
Brad,
Josh's next point was very important. Hold on. Josh's next point was very important. The Trump administration, the guy can't even release his tax returns.
Okay.
How transparent are they going to be?
All right, Ron, back to you.
Yeah, here's the issue, though. Hundreds of thousands of FOIA requests have been denied. This isn't, you know, a few thousand that are national security related. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. AP study, and this was done more than a year ago, it was around 300,000 FOIA requests have been denied by the Obama administration, and that's about a third of all the requests. You're saying a third of them are all national security related? And further, if you're talking about national security related...
That's not on the Obama administration. That's on the requests that are being put in by various reporters. That is not on the Obama administration. If they're requesting sensitive information... Well, but if reporters were asking for sensitive information, they're not going to get sensitive information. That's the
sensitive information.
Fact.
Sensitive information like who gets killed during drone strikes in the Middle East. The Obama administration.
Yes,
this is left-leaning outlets.
That actually is sensitive information. Absolutely.
So,
it doesn't matter who the outlet is. Left, right, center, fair, balanced. It doesn't matter. If it's sensitive information, it shouldn't be released to the public.
If everything is
simple.
sensitive, that's not transparent. That's the whole point. Is that liberal journalists, conservative journalists, we want to know what's happening in our government, and this government after a certain time. Exactly. I think that should be a bipartisan point.
All right, we're going to have to.
It is a bipartisan point.
All right. Well, yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to see what happens. All right, Ron Meyer and Brad Bauman, thank you both so much for joining us.
Patty Ann, meanwhile, China taking some steps to move hundreds of missiles, we're told, onto those man-made islands in the South China Sea. Coming up next, while U.S. officials say China is bringing the weapons onto the disputed territory, and they say it could be a threat.
Also, Israel's prime minister slamming President Obama after that recent UN resolution. How could it affect the relationship between the two countries? We'll talk about that. But also, prominent attorney and law professor Alan Dershowitz weighs in.
I think he was just trying to get even. Look, he called me into the Oval Office before the election, and he said to me, Alan, I want your support, and I have to tell you, I will always have Israel's back. I didn't realize what he meant is that he would have his back to stab them in the back, and he just stabbed them in the back. And this will make peace much more difficult to achieve.
U.S. intelligence officials say hundreds of Chinese surface-to-air missiles could be moved to the country's disputed man-made islands over the next few months. Officials say it may be part of China's effort to protect its 3 airstrips on the contested islands. The missiles include short, medium, and long-range weapons, as well as 1 battalion of the SA-21 missile system, which can knock out an aircraft from 250 miles away.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowing to do, quote, all it takes to make sure the Jewish state is not hurt by the anti-settlement resolution passed by the United Nations Security Council last week. The Prime Minister slamming President Obama over the weekend, accusing him of launching an ambush, he said, against Israel. The U.S. breaking with long-standing past practices of vetoing such measures, this time in the waning days of the Obama administration, allowing the UN Security Council to pass that measure.
I'm encouraged by the statements of our friends in the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike. They understand how reckless and destructive this UN resolution was. They understand that the Western Wall isn't occupied territory.
So, what is next for the U.S.-Israeli relationship and the pursuit of peace with the Palestinians? Jillian Turner joins us, a former member of the National Security Staff under Presidents Bush and Obama, vice president of the Jones Group and a Fox News contributor. Jillian, good to see you. Let me first start with the breaking news this morning. David Keyes, the Prime Minister's spokesman, saying that they have, quote, ironclad information that the administration was behind this. White House denying it. Do you think we will eventually see that ironclad information, as he said, and do you believe it?
I'll believe it when I see it is the best answer there. I think that at this point the Netanyahu administration is so upset with President Obama and his White House that they're sort of willing to say anything. So I really won't believe it until I see concrete evidence of that. I don't, for one, personally believe that's true.
And what about, the resolution and what it means for peace? Critics, of course, say the settlements are illegal, that they break international law. Other supporters say certainly not at all, as they continue. And the Prime Minister has shown basically no sense of backing off of the increased building and expanding of those settlements.
So, as you mentioned a moment ago, the UN abstention by the United States is unprecedented, but from a certain perspective, it's really not very surprising. The position of the Obama administration all along has always been that continued and unfettered expansion in the West Bank is anathema to a two-state solution for Israel and the Palestinians, and that it also undermines Israel's own long-term national security interests. So the fact that as a last move, as he's leaving office, he decided to take a really hard stance on this issue, it's not something that I found shocking. There's millions of Israelis there in Israel and around the world, by the way, that actually agree with President Obama on this.
But others, say that they need that protection, that these are the 67 lines. As you know, Naftali Bennett, chairman of the Jewish Home Party, for example, and some of the more right wing in the coalition, they say this is certainly legal. There's even that bill to try to get more private Palestinian land, kind of like eminent domain, and this will continue.
Well, but again, those hardliners are the same people who really don't believe in the two-state solution. They believe that Israel should reign supreme in the region, and that's it. They don't really care about what happens to the millions of Palestinians who live there as well. So I'd, caution about that as well.
Well, is that fair to say that they don't care? I mean, they have seen, they haven't seen peace, for decades. And David Friedman, who is the designated as the U.S. ambassador to Israel, is a big supporter of the settlements. He apparently raises money for those, as well as questioning the two-state solution, basically, against it.
Again, that's a very hard line approach to take here. Somebody like David Friedman has the potential as ambassador to really go against the grain and really cause some potential damage in the bilateral relationship in the other direction. So if this this abstention from the UN resolution is damaging our relations with the Israelis sort of on the left, this is the alternative on the right. I think we still have to focus on finding middle ground here at the end of the day. As simplistic as that sounds, there's not really room for this kind of grandstanding and provocation of rhetoric. People have to come together and work, kind of hammer through these issues here. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has done a spectacular job of exploiting our political system here at home over the last 4 years. He's completely allied himself with Republicans, with conservatives, and hasn't really cared about the Democrats and that issue at all. I would argue that's dangerous for Israel's long-term national interest, because never before has this issue been so politicized here in the U.S.
Well, finally, quickly, what do you think is going to happen? Friedman against the two-state solution, and there's commentary today saying this could start a complete reset, after decades of failure.
Well, a lot of Jews like myself are going to take offense to his previous comments when he said things like contemporary Jews in the United States and in the diaspora who sort of go against West Bank expansion and settlement policy are as bad as Jews who during the Holocaust supported Nazis. So I think there's a lot to be said about who's offending who here, and that all will get washed out. But again, it comes down to whether the incoming Trump administration is going to be able to work together with both sides, make them feel both legitimately and equally represented at a negotiating table.
Well,
that's the real challenge.
As Mr. Trump tweeted, it will change at the UN certainly on January 20th. Certainly a new era is coming. Jillian Turner, as always, thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Eric.
Of course. Patty Ann?
Well, from record-setting blizzards to major hurricanes, 2016 will be a year to remember in the world of weather. We'll take a look back at the events that shaped our year coming up.
And remembering a pop icon, as we have been reporting, George Michael has passed away. He was only 53 years old.
Did you know George? I know him. We see him in the village from time to time. He used to go to the local restaurants and things. So we see him about. I remember a few years ago when it was snowing, he and his partner were walking up the steps here to take photographs of the snow. Sorry, I'm very emotional this morning. I apologize.
Well, the music world loses another legend. 80s icon and pop superstar George Michael died in his home in England on Christmas. He was just 53 years old. He rose to fame in the group Wham before going solo and producing a string of hit songs. As soon as the news broke of his death, fans gathered outside his home to pay their respects. And you can see we're looking live now in London. And joining us right now is Kennedy, the host of Kennedy on Fox Business Network. Thank you for being with us.
Patty Ann, so nice to see you.
You too. So George Michael, of course, started out with Andrew Widgley in Wham. A lot of hits even just starting there.
Yeah, and they were such a huge pop sensation. They had met in school, and Andrew's brother and George had a short-lived band together. But then as a duo, they took the world by storm at a time where, obviously we were coming off a huge punk rock phase, and they were very unapologetically pop. And for George Michael to make the 90-degree turn to his more soulful side, which he did with his two first solo records, was really stunning. And, he had that incredible pop sensibility. And I don't think people realize the depth of his talent to not only perform some of those songs, but to write, arrange, and produce them as well. And there was some natural tension there between him and Andrew because, in one Rolling Stone interview, he joked with Andrew that he was just supposed to sit there and play guitar and he would take care of the rest.
Interesting, yeah. But as you say, he broke out even further as a solo artist, and he also came out as gay, not very uncommon right now, but back then considered a gutsy move.
Oh, and it's interesting because, this year we also lost Prince. And the two of them, I think, were so adept with bending their sexuality and keeping people guessing and sort of challenging gender norms. And he really didn't come out until 2008 when he was arrested for, or 1998 rather, when he was arrested for performing a lewd act in just outside Los Angeles at Will Rogers Park. Right. And he said one of the reasons he didn't want to come out is because he didn't want people harassing his mom. And, he apologized publicly many times for some of the run-ins that he had with the law because he was worried after he came out that it would have an effect on gay people, and it would be easier for people to denigrate homosexuals because of some of the stuff, the sexual and substance stuff that he had done publicly. And it's really interesting because there were these demons, there was this dark side that sort of fueled the light in his voice, much in the same way it did with Prince. And you hear that. Listen Without Prejudice Volume 1, which is his second solo album, has so many incredible sweeping moments that I think, this is a really good time of year. And for music fans and for those feeling the loss, to go back, listen to Faith, listen Without Prejudice, and, you can really hear some of that unrequited longing that sort of plagued him professionally and personally throughout his life. And there are people who say that after he left Sony Records and went to DreamWorks Virgin it was like a $40 million swap. DreamWorks had to pay Sony $40 million, that the music was never really the same, and he was so tortured by that, the same way Prince was with Warner Brothers.
Interesting. Now, in the wake of his death, first of all, very surprising, 53 years old. He did have a very serious battle with pneumonia a few years ago, but he recovered.
Yeah.
But then to die of heart failure at 53, just a shock, and the tributes now pouring in.
Yeah, and it just goes to show you that perhaps the stress and longing broke his heart. We don't really know. That was from his manager, Michael Lippman, who said that he had suffered a heart ailment and died peacefully in his sleep, which is what you would hope. But he was meant to release more music, and it's interesting because 5 days ago, I sent an email to one of my producers saying, let's get George Michael on the show. I met him several times when I was on MTV. I want to sit down and talk with him because I had recently been revisiting his music. And, it's so sad to see someone taken, especially, he sang beautifully in 1992 at that Freddie Mercury tribute concert. And you realize that he had the sort of sweeping vocal that could match almost Freddie Mercury in some of those incredible songs.
Yeah, interesting. You say you met him a few times.
Yeah.
Very briefly, what was he like?
Really smart, very conversational. He watched a lot of MTV. He referenced MTV in his music occasionally, and he was very much aware of his image on camera, and Freedom 90 was kind of an iconoclastic video because he wasn't in it. It was, in 1990, and he had all the supermodels before they were supermodels.
That's right.
So it was Cindy Crawford, Naomi Campbell, Tatiana Patitz, Linda Evangelista, and I know there's one important other one.
It's okay.
Christy Turlington.
That's right.
And they were all in that video. He wasn't in, and he burned his iconic BSA motorcycle jacket in the video. So
yeah, very big back at the time.
Yeah.
All right. Kennedy, thank you so much for your
Thanks,
insights into George Michael, gone from us way too soon. Eric?
Yeah, he's left a rich musical legacy, that's for sure. Thank you. Well, 2016 going down as a record-breaker year when it comes to the weather. From the heavy snowfall that hit the East Coast back in January to the devastation of Hurricane Matthew that slammed the Southeast in the fall, let's take a look with Rick Wackmuth, who looks back.
From powerful storms to record high temperatures, 2016 was marked by some extreme weather. January started mild, but later saw a record-breaking snowstorm in the Northeast. A winter storm that blanketed New York City, the heaviest snowstorm on record in the Big Apple, bringing nearly 28 inches of snow and a travel ban to the city that never sleeps. February was mostly mild, but not Valentine's Day. Parts of the U.S. felt some of the coldest temperatures in decades, including Boston, dipping to -9 degrees, the coldest it's been there in some 60 years. Meantime, in March, quite a sight south of the border, snow in parts of Mexico, low pressure triggering unusually cold conditions there. That same low served up heavy rain and flooding in parts of the southern U.S., while out west, March delivered more than 10 feet of snow to the Sierra Nevada mountains in one 10-day stretch. By April, parts of Texas were pelted with softball-sized hail. Multiple hailstorms resulted in billions of dollars of insurance losses statewide. The Lone Star State also saw some deadly flooding in April. Parts of the Houston area seeing 20 inches of rain and flooding that left 8 people dead. In May, unseasonably hot, dry weather in Canada was fueling massive wildfires and evacuations in Canada's oil-producing region. The fires ultimately affected global oil prices. While in the U.S., powerful tornadoes hit Kansas, including an EF4 near the town of Chapman that stayed on the ground for miles. June brought heavy rains and deadly flooding to West Virginia. More than 20 people died as 10 inches of rain fell in just 12 hours. July marked the Earth's warmest month on record, and in the U.S., warm water temperatures helped fuel a massive toxic algae bloom in Florida, with thick green slime blanketing beaches. August also saw severe flooding in the South, with Louisiana especially hard hit. Deadly catastrophic flooding submerged thousands of homes and businesses there as many rivers reach record levels. August also kicked off a string of hurricanes, starting with Hurricane Earl maxing out with 80-mile-an-hour winds. It made landfall in Belize and triggered flooding that killed more than 36 people in Mexico. Later, Hurricane Hermine hit, making landfall south of Tallahassee, Florida as a Category 1 storm. It knocked out power from Florida through the mid-Atlantic. Then by early October, Hurricane Matthew, the year's deadliest storm, hit Haiti as a devastating Category 4 hurricane. It eventually scraped the coast of Florida and came ashore in South Carolina, triggering major damage and inland flooding in the Carolinas. By November, the U.S. was already seeing a major snowstorm before Thanksgiving, moving across the country, bringing blizzard conditions to some areas. By the end of the month, drought conditions in the southeast helped fuel droves of forest fires, including fires in Tennessee that killed more than a dozen people. And around the same time, Tennessee and Alabama also saw a series of deadly tornadoes. But in the end, the biggest weather headline, 2016 will go down as the hottest year ever recorded on planet Earth since weather data first started being kept back in the 19th century. In New York, I'm Fox News Chief Meteorologist Rick Reichmuth.
Well, President-elect Trump announcing he'll shut down his charitable foundation to avoid conflicts of interest while he's in office. We'll tell you why the Democratic National Committee is criticizing that decision and says he needs to do a lot more. The Democratic National Committee criticizing President-elect Donald Trump for his decision to dissolve his charitable foundation. Top Democrats now say he should take more steps to avoid conflicts of interest. The DNC releasing a statement that says, in part, the Trump Foundation also has a pitiful record of service and instead has served as a slush fund for Trump to bribe elected officials, attack his political enemies, and buy portraits of himself. We're glad he's shutting down this corrupt enterprise, but questions remain about how this shutdown will accommodate the investigation into the foundation. Well, joining us now is Kelly Jane Torrance, the deputy managing editor of the Weekly Standard. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Penny Ann.
So a DNC communications aide calls the dissolving of the foundation a cover-up. Deputy Communications Director of the Democratic National Committee, Eric Walker, saying it's a wilted fig leaf to cover up his remaining conflicts of interest and pitiful record of charitable giving. Let's talk first about the conflicts of interest. What evidence is there?
Now, Donald Trump, this is a good first move, shutting down the foundation, but if he thinks it's going to end things, he is completely wrong. Now, conflicts of interest, the Trump Foundation made a $25,000 donation to a political committee supporting Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi right at the same time that she was considering allegations of fraud against Trump University. And of course, she did not pursue those allegations. She did not file a complaint against him. And there has been discussion whether that donation influenced her decision. She says not. And Trump, of course, is not allowed, the foundation is not allowed to give a political donation. It's a nonprofit charity. And so Trump has had to pay a fine for that. But it's certainly not the only one. And it's a real problem. Now, the New York Attorney General's office is investigating the Trump Foundation, and they actually have come out and said now that he cannot close his foundation before they are done investigating. So I think Trump would like to think, I'm closing it, end of story, but there's no way that this is going to disappear anytime soon.
Right. Trump says he's talking to his lawyers and saying he wants to initiate the process, but apparently, according to Eric Schneiderman, it cannot happen until his investigation is concluded. But Walker, meanwhile, also says the foundation has a pitiful record of service. Mr. Trump is saying in a statement that the foundation has done, quote, enormous good works, contributing millions to countless worthy groups, including veterans, law enforcement, and children. Going on to say, quote, I'm very proud of the fact that the foundation has operated at essentially no cost for decades, with 100% of the money going to charity. So where's the truth?
The truth is somewhere in the middle. Now, it is true that the foundation doesn't have any full-time paid employees, which is good because, as Trump himself pointed out about the Clinton Foundation, there was a lot of talk about money going towards consultants and such that worked for the foundation who also were close friends of Hillary's politically. But the thing is, other people have donated money to the Trump Foundation. Trump himself, not so much. His his first donation in almost a decade just came last year as he's running for president, and it was only $616,000. Given how much Trump says he's worth, that's not very much. And you sort of wonder, does he need this foundation? Can he just donate money directly to charity? And in fact, it's Trump's friends who do seem to be the ones that are giving money. Now, Vince McMahon, he's given, $5 million in a year. So people are donating to the foundation, but not Trump himself.
Right. Well, Mr. Trump, meanwhile, criticized the Clinton Foundation during the campaign. He called it a criminal enterprise. How would you compare the two foundations?
Well, I think Trump is actually a bit of a victim of his own success in this regard because, the media wasn't too eager to cover the Clinton Foundation's conflicts of interest and shady dealings before Trump really started hammering them during the campaign. So Trump himself made the public aware of how so-called charitable foundations might not be as charitable as they first seem. So the fact that people are now looking more closely at his own, it's really partly his own fault. Now, clearly it's not the same thing at all in that Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and we know that over half of the people she met with as Secretary of State were donors to the Clinton Foundation. That seems a pretty obvious problem, and you kind of wonder what sort of payment for access they were getting. Now, Trump hasn't yet had power. He hasn't had the ability to do any sort of favors like that. So his foundation hasn't had the chance to become embroiled in that kind of thing. And that's why I think it is a good step that he's shutting it down before he becomes president. The problem is that going to be the end of the story politically?
Right.
And I think not.
Okay. Kelly Jane Torrance, thank you so much.
Thank you, Patty Ann.
Well, there are some new concerns at this hour, Patty Ann, about the health of Carrie Fisher. She suffered an apparent heart attack on an airplane. We'll have an update on her condition next and ask a doctor about her health issues and if an 11-hour plane ride from London to Los Angeles could affect any health issues. Well, actress Debbie Reynolds is saying that her daughter, Carrie Fisher, is now in stable condition in a Los Angeles hospital. That 3 days after she had an apparent heart attack on a flight from London to Los Angeles. Ms. Fisher, as you may know, has had a history of bipolar disorder and addiction, but there's been no indication, we're told, that she had any heart problems in the past. So what could happen? Dr. Devi is with us, an associate professor at the NYU School of Medicine. Dr. Devi, we're all pulling for her. She's been in overdrive recently, her schedule with the new Star Wars movie, doing lots of interviews. She was in London promoting her new memoirs. And I can imagine there is something that's no more perhaps concerning than being stricken while you're on an airplane. In mid-flight.
Sure. I mean, she's very, very lucky to be alive, not just for the fact that she was on the plane, but also the fact that her heart stopped. They actually had to start CPR, which means she had no pulse and the heart wasn't pumping. Now, very few people survive something like that, so this is somewhat miraculous for her.
They say it was like 15 minutes before the plane got into LAX that there was a nurse on board who was performing CPR. The pilots, of course, radioed ahead, the paramedics at the gate also dealt with her. Reports say she's on a ventilator now at the hospital. Family saying she's stable. But if she stopped breathing for 10 minutes and you're on a ventilator, I mean, what does that mean?
Well, so there are two things. So if you stop breathing, the problem is that both your heart and your brain aren't getting oxygen, right? So you can have long-term damage from that. Then being on the ventilator now, she could still be stable as long as they're getting the oxygen to the different areas, but she's not off the ventilator yet. So she's still, she's not clear yet, right? Now, when I think about these things, I usually think of heart issues as being either mechanical problems or electrical problems, which she might have had both. So this is the idea, like let's say you're watching TV, right? And you have a new TV and it's not working. It's possible there's something wrong with one of the parts in the TV, and that's a mechanical problem. But it's also possible that maybe your battery's not working in your remote or your TV's not plugged in properly, right? So that's electrical. Now, what happens is when someone has a heart attack, they're having a mechanical problem. So the blood that carries oxygen to the heart, maybe that vessel is getting clogged, right? And so if the heart doesn't get oxygen, the muscle can't pump, and the heart is a pump carrying oxygen to the rest of the body.
What's the best way to find out if you have clogged arteries? I mean, is that a stress test?
Yeah, you could. Well, you could do that. I mean, usually, in general, you want to check different risk factors. So if you have high cholesterol, if you have high blood pressure, all of these things put you at risk to have clogged arteries. Now, in her case, too, we think that maybe there was an electrical problem. So that's where the heart stops pumping because the electricity is not working.
And finally, it's an 11-hour flight. And we've heard in the past about thrombosis, that you've got to stand up and walk around an airplane, especially if you're sitting for long periods of time. As passengers, could that have contributed to her situation? And what should we do when we're on long flights like this to prevent, a possible thrombosis?
Well, in her case, if she had a blood clot, if that goes to the lungs, the problem is that your heart may not be getting oxygen because you're not getting enough oxygen into your lungs itself, right? So that's one problem. I mean, if you walk up and down on the plane, if you move quite a bit, that can protect you against a blood clot. And on the other hand, she also could have been on other medications sometimes. And with her intense schedule, sometimes these things can affect your electrolytes. They can have, you can potentially have drug-drug interactions. So all of these different factors could have put her at risk for this event.
Well, certainly we're hoping that she does pull through, and our thoughts are with her family and all the legion of fans across the country.
Of course.
And prayers for her at this hour. Dr. Devi, good to see you, and thank you for your advice. Of course. Patty Ann?
Well, President-elect Donald Trump sending Washington into a frenzy with his controversial tweet about nuclear capabilities. It led Fox News Sunday host Chris Wallace to ask the pointed question, is Twitter the way to conduct foreign policy? We'll debate ahead.